Once again, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adrienne Lim, and I'm Dean of Libraries at the University of Maryland, College Park. I'd like to extend a very, very warm welcome to all of you as we begin our panel presentation today, titled The Black Librarian in America, Reflections, Resistance, and Reawakening. We're very excited to have you here with us for the next 75 minutes or so as we honor Black librarians, intersectional identities and experiences, and as we celebrate the astounding impact that Black librarians and library workers have had in the library and archives profession and in American society and culture. At the end of our formal panel presentation, we hope that there will be ample time for audience questions and comments. Please use the Q&A function in your Zoom session to submit any questions or comments for the panel. We're also recording the session and we'll plan to share the recording on the UMD Library's YouTube page if you'd like to view the session later. Now I'm pleased to introduce today's distinguished moderator, who will then introduce our amazing speakers. Dr. Joni Floyd is the curator of the Maryland and Historical Collections, Forest Special Collections, and University Archives at the University of Maryland Libraries. She also co-chairs the 1856 Project, which is UMD's chapter of universities studying slavery. Dr. Floyd's critical archival work, she focuses on participatory heritage initiatives as community archives, personal history writing, and collaborative documentation. Joni, thank you so much for agreeing to serve as our moderator, and I will turn the microphone over to you.
Well, thank you for your warm welcome and kind introduction, Dean Lim. And I too would like to thank our attendees for joining today's discussion on the Black Librarian in America, Reflections, Resistance, and Reawakening. Again, my name is Joni Floyd, and it's a pleasure to facilitate today's discussion. I'm going to begin with some context. In 2020, the Black Caucus of the American Library Association, I'll refer to it as BCALA, turned 50. And with the celebration, also came calls from around the country for BCALA to weigh in on various crises. With 2020 also being a year of unrest in the wake of COVID-19 and the prominence of police brutality, BCALA leaders were asked to express their feelings on the collective state of the country. The moment was fit for renewed conversations on the importance of Black library work and workers. We're continuing that conversation here today. This panel presentation is also being held in commemoration of Black History Month. Indeed, Black librarians and archivists have been vital to chronicling, curating, and celebrating African American heritage. This has always been and remains a defiant act. Black librarians comprise only a fraction of the U.S. library and information profession. Therefore, this book, which consists of 19 chapters, centers Black librarians' capacities and contributions. This iteration of the fourth edition in the series is This iteration is the fourth in a series first edited in 1970 by the late Dr. E.J. Josie, who co-founded the Black Caucus of the ALA, along with Effie Lee Morris. This edition is the first to be edited entirely by Black women. For the next 20 minutes or so, you will view 2 videos followed by remarks from the panelists, including remarks from one of the chapter authors. Following that, the editors will also talk about the book's impact 1 year after its publication. I will then pose a few questions to our panel, and then we will welcome questions from you in our audience. So please allow me now to introduce our guest speakers. Keandra Bills Freeman is the Project Stand Coordinator at the University of Maryland Libraries and is the author of Expanding the Black Archival Imagination, a chapter in the Black Librarian in America. Her research interests include digital archiving and memory work. And I can't see the screen, but I hope as I introduce you, you're turning on your camera. Her research interests include digital archiving and memory work, personal archiving, and Black cultural production. Keandra is creator of the independent digital archiving initiative, Black Women Writers Project, and the team lead for Mapping Black Literary DC and Archival Discovery and Digital Humanities Project. Next, Ms. Shantae Burns-Simpson served as the 2020-2022 president of the BCALA. She is the associate director of the Center for Educators and Schools for the New York Public Library. An ambassador for libraries and a youth librarian, Mrs. Simpson enjoys connecting people to the public library and its resources. She works closely with at-risk teens and fosters a love of reading and learning with her innovative programs. In addition to leading BCALA, she chairs ALA's Committee on Diversity. Ms. Michelle Hayes is the current president of the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. She has been instrumental in leading the Indianapolis Public Library and also serves in a number of community boards throughout the state of Indiana, including the Indiana Black Librarians Network, the NAACP, and the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And she is a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Dr. Anna Ndumu is an assistant professor at the University of Maryland College Park's College of Information Studies. Dr. Ndumu primarily researches and teaches on library services to immigrants, particularly Black diasporic immigrants, along with methods for promoting representation and inclusion in ILS. A former HBCU, historically Black colleges and universities, a former HBCU librarian for over a decade, she is interested in the cross between Black identity, information access, and social inclusion. Finally, Dr. Sandra Walker is the library director at Georgia College. Dr. Walker has over 22 years of experience working in libraries and higher education. Her work and research in these areas are deeply influenced by her experience attending and working in HBCUs. Her research interests include the recruitment and retention of diverse librarians and organizational development within the library. We'll now have 2 short films. Afterwards, our panelists will take center stage and talk about their role and experiences in editing this book. Hey, Judy.
Now available in one thought-provoking book, a work addressing race, diversity, leadership, and more. The Black Librarian in America, Reflections, Resistance, and Reawakenings. A book libraries will reference for generations to come. Available now online. Now,
Black librarians in whose footsteps I followed and who always provided inspiration and support. They are part of the legacy that Black librarians in this country provided, a roadmap to help thousands to chart their own journeys and definitely make sure that their communities were respected and served. As a youth librarian, I was especially inspired by the legacies of Vivian Harsh, Charlamagne Rollins, Augusta Baker, Henrietta Smith, Spencer Shaw, and Benny Tate. My career was also enhanced, propelled, and shaped by Annie Lee Carroll, Dorothy Evans, E.J. Josie, Mary Biblo, Deborah Taylor, Vivian Fisher, Teresa Edmonds, Martha Ruff, Kathleen Bethel, and Andrew Jackson. The perseverance and contributions of Black librarians will continue to pave the way for the next generation of librarians who are dedicated to service for their communities. I am sincerely grateful for their legacy.
Thank you so much, Dean Lim and Dr. Floyd, for that warm introduction. My name is Chandra Walker, and I was honored and privileged to serve as one of the co-editors for this book. Dr. Carla Hayden's comments are a nice segue in what I would like to share with you today, because the previous books in this series, which include The Black Librarian in America, The Black Librarian in America Revisited, as well as The 21st Century Black Librarian, have all served as sources of inspiration to me, particularly when I was a new librarian fresh from the library education program at Clark Atlanta University. At a time when I was professionally isolated and didn't have opportunities to regularly network with librarians who understood my lived experience, the books helped me to feel more comfortable. So it's a privilege for me to work on this book and to hopefully provide a resource that will inspire librarians for generations to come. The book is divided into 4 sections, and each editor was responsible for editing a single section. As a student of Black history, and more specifically Black librarian history, I jumped at the chance to edit the first section, which is entitled A Rich Heritage, Black Librarian History. Next slide, please. So I'm going to briefly go over the chapters. The section opens up with a strong chapter by Rhonda Evans of the Schomburg Library, who makes the connection, and this is a quote directly from Rhonda, that libraries have always been a part of the freedom struggle for African Americans. In her chapter, she highlights how notable leaders, specifically W.E.B. Du Bois, whose birthday happens to be today, took up the cause of promoting Black librarians at the New York Public Library. She introduces us to Catherine Latimer, who was denied an opportunity to work at the Schomburg Library and had her cause taken up not only by Du Bois, but other leaders such as Walter White, the Reverend Adam Clayton Powell Sr., and others. Next slide, please. The next chapter in the book features a conversation with Dr. Robert Wedgeworth and is authored by co-editor Dr. Anna Ndumu, who rightly places Wedgeworth into the larger history of African Americans' contributions to the library profession. As you probably know, Dr. Wedgeworth was the first African American appointed to serve as executive director of the American Library Association. The conversational tone gives readers a peek into the fullness of Dr. Wedgeworth's life, including his service as a library director, dean, and other accomplishments. Next slide, please. Following Dr. Ndumu's chapter is an enlightening overview of the history of library education programs at historically Black colleges and universities. Dr. Aisha Johnston sheds light on the history of library education for African Americans, including the challenges faced by various programs, including those at Hampton Institute, Atlanta University, and North Carolina Central University. She makes some important points that are relevant for those interested in diversity, equity, and inclusion within present-day LIS programs. And then finally, next slide, I authored a chapter in this section, a profile of a woman by the name of Adela Hunt Logan, who was the first librarian at Tuskegee Institute, but also what I would refer to as an activist librarian. She was an educator, reformer, and a suffrage. Hunt's life began just prior to the Civil War, and she lived into the nadir of the Black experience in America. She had a fascinating life. She was a contemporary and associate of leaders and scholars as diverse as Susan B. Anthony, George Washington Carver, Mary Church Terrell, Booker T. Washington, and also W.E.B. Du Bois. Her unique life illustrates how the librarian role has historically been a space for middle-class Black women to exist within the intersection of literacy, librarianship, and social justice. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Anna Ndumu, who will talk to you about section 2 of this book. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Walker. And I too would like to thank Dean Lim, Judith, Joni, Dr. Floyd, and all of the UMD library staff who have been amazing in supporting this event. I'd also like to thank a few authors, all of the authors really, they just were incredible to work with. I can't emphasize that enough. There were no weak chapters and everyone was extremely committed to this project. So thank you to all of the authors, several of whom are in attendance today. So we see you and we earnestly love you. And there were a few authors who are affiliated with the University of Maryland who we'd also like to shout out as fellow Terps. Julius Jefferson Jr., who is an alum, and also former ALA president. There's also Shannon Bland, who also wrote a chapter on digital librarianship. Tawana Hodge, a PhD student at the UMD iSchool as well. And I believe that's it. So thank you. We wanted to recognize all of the authors, especially those who are fellow Terps. So my chapter is on, next slide, please, collective and individual identity. And in this volume, it was very important for us to spotlight the variance among Black librarians and also some of the philosophy and ideology that we haven't probed enough. What is our collective why? And with that, we had an incredible chapter that sort of was a great segue from the previous chapter on the dynamic history. And this was rooted, I'm Rooting for Everyone, Black, a Labor of Love, written by Gina Duvernay, who is an incredible archivist and African-American historian. And so Gina argues that there is a collective identity, and it's so interesting because for the Black Caucus of the American Library Association, she was able to interview and lead a session with Dr. Jarvis Givens, who writes about fugitive pedagogy, wherein Black History Month and Carter G. Woodson's legacy is that of fugitive pedagogy. And in her chapter, coincidentally, she writes that there has been a grand vision for Black librarianship, one in which we have always understood the profession, but also our collective assignment. So it's a really good a chapter that says we see each other when we see people come into the library, when we see coworkers in our spaces, and when we see what's happening in society. We cannot not see our work through the lens of Blackness and our commitment to Black communities. Following that, James Allen Davis Jr. writes about an intersection that we really don't recognize, which is the Western Black librarian. So he is the founder of the Colorado Black Librarians Association, has been an intrepid leader within the Black Caucus of ALA. And he writes that Denver and Colorado, being neighbors to Tulsa, Oklahoma, had a similar trajectory and a similar history of Black progress and Black promise, but we hardly hear that. And so much of Black library discourse and leadership is concentrated within the Eastern Coast and the Southern states in the US, but there are librarians who are often overlooked on the Western side of the country and what their realities, especially in deeply white spaces, what their realities have been and how they have been able to subvert white supremacy in these deeply white, often oppressive spaces. Perhaps not Denver, Colorado, but the region itself is not where we have large majority Black cities. And following that, we have a chapter by the late Kenya Flash, who here we appropriately put a halo. She has gone to join the ancestors, and Tawana Hodge and Kelsa Bartley, who write about another taken for granted identity within Black librarianship, that of Afro-Caribbean librarians living in the US and what it means to be Black. So this was more of a critical piece, again, on the philosophy and ideology of Blackness, that there's no one design and template for Blackness in the US, and we have many ethnicities and many realities. So they share about their backgrounds. Kenya was born in Jamaica. She speaks of her beautiful life, and we do miss her. And also Tawana is from St. Thomas, Virgin Islands, and Kelsa is from Trinidad and Tobago. And they write about how they migrated here and their ideas of libraries and their professional outlook shifted as well. That too had to migrate. Moving on, we also have another critical piece by Kai Alexis Smith on being on the margins of the margins of the margins, and how Black librarians and library workers with disabilities or neurodivergence are not often recognized and seen. And she discusses how in the middle of the pandemic, she discovered that she's living with a progressive visual impairment and how she had to adjust to that in the midst of so much other tumult. And what that means, working with texts, working in information-rich environments, and also being Black, and spotlighting this unique corner of Black librarian identity. And rounding out this section is Roland Barksdale Hall, who is a griot, storyteller, poet, author, just all-around library giant who has been a leader in BCALA and librarianship in general for decades. So he talks about Uhuru, which is freedom, and how that is an ethos within Black librarianship, and how through storytelling and literary empowerment, we can bring healing to our communities, and the ways in which he's done that through programming and through stories. So this chapter really, next slide, please, has been an attempt to display and demonstrate people who have not been able to share their corner and their aspect and their vantage point of Black librarianship. And one of the sections that I'd like to read is that of Kaya Alexis, because I think her story is incredibly vivid. Sandra Bland, Eric Gardner, Freddie Gray. What is overlooked with the tragic killings of so many Black lives is that they also experience mental illness or developmental disabilities. A third to half of individuals killed by police officers experience disabilities. According to the US Census, almost a quarter of the Black population has some form of disability. Data supports that the Black population has an increased rate of mental health concerns, including anxiety and depression. These conditions may go untreated as a result of a lack of access to appropriate and culturally responsive mental health care. Also, historical trauma from unethical experimentation by the medical field, and of course, everyday prejudice and racism. This also prompts Black people with invisible disabilities to hide their conditions to mitigate judgment and bias at the expense of equitable support. She finishes by saying, just as disability is left out of discussions about police brutality, it is also left out of conversations on Black library professionals or librarians or library workers. These conditions are compounded in the very white profession of librarianship, causing Black and disabled librarians to not receive the same access as their counterparts. Thank you. I'll now pass it on to Shantae.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, UMD, and to everyone that's in attendance today. I will talk about the third section of the book, which is the Black Librarians Across Settings. Next slide, please. Yes, so this section covers the digital communities for Black library staff, Black librarians using STEM with youth, as well as experiences in the health sciences. It also includes library leaders and their challenges in academia and in general. And I'm going to do a little read aloud real quick. I'm going to read from the Black Librarian in America, of course, and I'm going to read from page 162. The Black librarian has always addressed the social inequality at the front desk, during story time, and beyond policy or policing. Black librarians can empower themselves and one another by continuing to honor and build upon the work of those who came before them. In 1900s, Edward Christopher Williams became the first African-American to be trained as a professional librarian at the New York State Library School. Dorothy B. Porter, Columbia University's first Black library school graduate, worked to reclassify the Dewey Decimal System's misrepresentation of works by Black authors. Charlamagne Hall Rollins, an advocate for diverse children's literature, developed criteria for the selection of materials that depict the lives of Black people. Dr. Virginia Lacey Jones, Dean of the Atlanta University Library School from 1945 to 1982, trained at least 2,624 African-American librarians, more than any other school. A strong network can foster mutual support. E.J. Josie recognized this truth and thus created the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. The aim is not to be insular, but to highlight, create, and provide ongoing opportunities for learning, mentorship, leadership, advocacy where they may not otherwise exist. You want to know more? You got to get the book. Next slide, please. Oh, we just went a little crazy. Okay, so I just read it, so we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So thank you to E.J. Josie, Clara Stan Jones, and all of the trailblazers who came before us, because they show how important we are to this work. Next slide. Is there a next slide? No, see, there we go. But continued thanks to all the people continuing this work. Our profession continues to learn and grow because of you. Thank you, and I will hand it over to current president of BCALA, Nichelle M. Hayes.
Thank you so much, immediate past president Shantae Burns Simpson. I would like to say good afternoon to everyone, to the UMD staff and guests. I'm honored to be on this panel today, and I'm honored to discuss Black librarianship and where we are today. I'm going to be reading some excerpts from the introduction, the first beginning chapter, and I will start now on page 1. Sadly, the constancy and potency of anti-Black racism has not changed. Despite notable professional gains, as witnessed through the inclusion of Blacks and African Americans in the highest echelons of library leadership, these milestones remain the exceptions rather than the norm among Black librarians, not for want of professional capacity or dynamism out. It's for this reason that we wanted to represent both memory and ambition. We also hope to capture how Black librarians have navigated structural disempowerment. We also noted that Black women leaders need better support mechanisms. And that was one of the reasons we were intentional in having 4 female editors for this particular work. And I continue to reflect on our subtitle, Reflections, Resistance, and Reawakening. And finally, in section 3, Deloise Holliday and Michelle Fenton in chapter 14 make a compelling case for leadership training and development for Black librarians. The library status quo will not improve, they argue, until librarians of color hold decision-making positions. Their chapter is vividly entitled, Leading While Black, Are You Up for the Challenge? And what I would say there is to really support Black librarians of all stripes. We need everyone. We need allies. We need supporters. We need sponsors. We need people who are going to step up and stand in the gap. I also would like to encourage everyone to join the Black Caucus for the American Library Association. We are truly stronger together. And if you're a student, you have a free membership for 2 years. And I would like to end my portion on an uplifting note, a poem by Mari Evans. I am a Black woman. Music of my song, some sweet arpeggio of tears, is written in a minor key. And I can be heard humming in the night, I saw my mate leap screaming to the sea, and I, with these hands, cupped the life breath from my issue in the cane break. I lost Nat's swinging body in the rain of tears, and I heard my son scream all the way from Anzio for peace he never knew. I learned Da Nang and Pork Chop Hill in anguish. Now my nostrils know the gas, and these trigger-tired fingers seek the softness in my warrior's beard. I am a Black woman, tall as a cypress, strong beyond all definition, still defying place and time and circumstance. Assailed, impervious, look on me and be renewed, by Mari Evans. And next, I will hand it over to Keandra.
Hello. Okay, so I'm just waiting for my slides to be pulled up, but I'm Keandra Bills Freeman. And I wrote the chapter for the book in my second semester as an MLIS student at Maryland, just after the birth of my first child and the height of the pandemic. So it was certainly a chaotic time. My chapter is the final essay in the book, and it considers the role that digital content creators play in archival discovery and curation, and how Black digital memory work disrupts legacies of archival violence. So I don't know if Judy, you can go to the slide with the quote, but I don't know why the slides aren't showing up for you all, but I will read the quote since I don't see it. It's by Bell Hooks. It says, "From Art on My Mind, we have to think deeply about the cultural legacies that can sustain us, that can protect us against the cultural genocide that is daily destroying our past. We need to document the existence of living traditions, both past and present, that can heal our wounds and offer us a space of opportunity where our lives can be transformed." And I wanted to start with that quote because I think it really gets at the heart of what I mean when I'm talking about Black archives, and just how it serves a function that's much greater than, I would say, traditional notions of and mainstream notions of what archival practice is. And it's really about the fact that archives are dynamic and can hold the potential to transform. And so when I come to my work, that's what I'm always thinking about, like, how is this work going to be used? And how can I make sure that it, as an archivist, can reach the most amount of people who might see it, have access to it for beyond just like writing a PhD, but how it can actually transform somebody's life and their own understanding of themselves. So my primary argument is that archival practice is made stronger when we embrace the specific needs and perspectives of Black people in the creation, collection, preservation, and use of our histories and narratives. And I use digital content creators operating on Instagram to illustrate these points. So you can go to the next slide, Judy. And the next one after this, please. So I want to start with an example because I think this is the easiest way to communicate what I mean by these digital content creators. This is blackarchives.co, which started off as a Tumblr page, so has been embedded in digital practice from its very beginning. Now the creator, Renata Charlize, has many other non-digital projects that kind of came out of this. But I think this is one of the most successful examples of an Instagram page that engages the archive and uses kind of non-traditional methods and curation to communicate, the value of archival materials beyond just our standard reading rooms. So I think, if you see at the top, they have 520,000 followers, just to give you an estimate, like, the Harry Ransom Center, Yale, all of these kind of big archives have somewhere 15,000 and less. So 520,000 is significant for almost any kind of Instagram page. And as professional archivists, it can be easy to write this kind of work off as if it's a vanity project because it's on Instagram and it's not real archival work. But in my opinion, this is just an extension of memory work at large, and it needs to be embraced. For instance, of the 6 photos here, they represent 5 different repositories. So Kent State, University of Illinois, Chicago, University of Kentucky, Library of Congress, UC Santa Cruz. So one thing that digital content creators can do that we cannot really do as institution-based archivists is curate across collections, across repositories, and that recontextualization is important for people being able to use the archives beyond, as a way of affirmation and not just as a research tool. So digital content creators are recontextualizing the archive and allowing for broader narratives around play, kinship, and joy to shine through. Not only that, it's easy to digest this history. It's meant for both pleasure and learning. And this is what digital content creators really master. And they're able to use these spaces and platforms to engage a broader audience to Black historical records. So traditional institution-based archival practice often misses these opportunities by focusing on struggle or historical first or the many traumas Black people have had to endure. And not to say that those are insignificant moments, but what the digital space is really allowing is for the narrative to broaden and really push back against these histories of archival violence and erasure, or just the forefronting of a specific part of Black life, which is often hardship. So expanding the Black archival imagination requires that we, as institution-based archivists and special collections librarians, embrace the new ways that information is exchanged and interpreted, and see all memory work as necessary to ensuring a more representative historical record that reflects the richness of Black life. So if you can just go to the next slide, Judy. I wanted to just share here some of the projects that I include in the essay that I think are really great at doing this, as well as their creators, which are mentioned at the bottom, because this is coming at the expense of someone's labor, and I want to make sure I acknowledge that. And the next slide, please. So that concludes my presentation. Here's my information. If anyone wants to talk more about it offline. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Keandra. Can everyone hear me? I'm assuming that you can.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Keandra, and thank you, editors. I certainly got a lot from the book, and I didn't realize I could get anything more, but listening to you all talk about the book and that focus on the chapter was a very rich experience that I had, and I'm sure that our audience had as well. So now we're going to, I'm going to ask you a few questions, and during this, I have about 5 questions, which kind of have some prompts built in, but I'm just letting the audience know that I'm going to keep on asking questions and unless I see some more questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to start with my first question. It's about origins, and that is, could you tell us more about the origin story for the Black librarian in America? In particular, how did you all come together as editors? And what are your own origin stories in terms of how you became a librarian?
So, Dr. Floyd, I will start. This was a very hectic time when we started on this book. And as I can remember it, Dr. Anna came to us and she said, I've got an idea about a book, and Dr. Chandra and I are going to work together. At that time, Shantae Burns-Simpson was our president, and they brought me in asking me to help. I was honored to do that. And then it was just a whirlwind of people submitting information, being able to edit things and look over it and kind of learn in depth as we were going along. So it was very, very exciting. I felt like it was very organic. It was a labor, but I would consider it a labor of love.
Wonderful. Anyone want to add to that retelling of your labor of love?
No, I'm glad Nichelle said it, because I know Anna likes to be modest about the conversation of this project. And all I remember was, I don't know if I could be a good editor, but let's do it. and you got to think about it. The time that we were doing this, we were all stuck in the house. So kind of like another thing to get our mind off of the situation. So I'm truly thankful for this project, honestly. I forget how many months pregnant I was, but this is definitely something to keep me not thinking about the world probably coming to an end.
And I'm going to bounce credit to Chandra because we had talked for years. We met as HBCU librarians, I won't even say how long ago, many years ago. And we were writing at that point. This was in the early 2000s. And we have always thought that there needs to be either a Black librarian journal, so a research arm of BCALA. And those were conversations that came up regularly, that there needs to be more bias for a scholarship. At the same time, this volume had not been renewed for some time. I believe the last one, correct me if I'm wrong, Chandra, was it published in 2010? Julius Jefferson, Andrew Sekou, and another colleague had published it, but it was Black Librarian. Thank you so much. in the 21st century. And we're now 23 years in the 21st century, and it was a time to revisit that. And at the same time, in 2020, I recall, and Shantae knows, we were being called on from left and right. We were board members. Chandra was the organizational consultant and de facto executive director, if you will, and Michelle was VP, and the Black Caucus was called on to opine on everything. So we needed a voice that wasn't posturing, that wasn't performative. We were really trying to be earnest with this book and say exactly what we wanted to say, because a lot of times interviews were given, it was distilled, and quite frankly, sometimes it was whitewashed, and what we ultimately spent an hour and a half sharing in an interview was distilled to only 800 words. And so this was a way. We were thankful to Roman and Littlefield, who were amazing as publishers in the pandemic to boot, for allowing us actually to keep shifting deadlines, because there was that. And then also it was a difficult time to be wrestling with these topics. It was heavy work, I won't lie. And so Chandra, I have to give the credit to, because for years she said that we need a scholarship arm to Black librarianship, a real research trajectory, and possibly a journal. So from my lips to God's ears, you heard it here first. Hopefully there'll be a journal of Black librarianship, who knows? Chandra?
Yeah, so just kind of following up on the other responses, we have had conversations over the years about the need for an outlet for Black librarians. And I think thinking about the predecessors to this particular book, that's what the Black Librarian in America did. If you read them, the authors read like a virtual who's who of Black librarianship. And so it's always, BCLA, usually in the form of a book, has provided a space for Black librarians to tell their truth. I distinctly remember a conversation that we had at ALA, I think in 2019, just before the pandemic, and we had gone to this event at the bookstore. The name escapes me right now. Gosh, I wish I could think of it. But anyway, there was a gathering of Black librarians, and we went there and we were like, hey, we were talking more about the journal. I think it was Anna, myself. Yes. Mahogany book. Yes. Myself, Anna, Forrest Foster, Dina Duvernay, Carl Leak. We were just like, hey, this would be great. And of course, you go to conferences, you have these great ideas. We all went back and had no idea that the pandemic was going to happen. And so then, we were all at home, but as Anna mentioned, BCLA was being requested for, to give opinions on various things. And we knew that a journal would probably take a while to get off the ground, but the precedent had been set with the Black librarian in America, particularly at that pivotal moment, because you had George Floyd murder, you had the pandemic kind of exposing and highlighting for the world the different disparities, and particularly how they affected marginalized groups of people. And so the time felt right for a new edition of the Black Librarian in America. I think all of the books have been responsive to a particular moment. And so this is very much a work, I think, that arose out of the pandemic and the time that it also gave people to reflect and to think about their lives and think about themselves and their experiences and the needs of their communities. And so in that way, I think it was very much in the tradition of the Black Caucus and very much in the tradition of the Black Library in America as a book series. So.
Thank you.
Oh, but we skipped over your second part. How do we become librarians, right?
If you want to answer it.
Well, I'm just going to put it out there. I started as a page. So this is a summer job that I never left. And if we could see all of the attendees, or if they could put in the chat, I would love to know how many people came into this career as a page or office aide or whatever you may call it in your library. But I'm just really grateful for the fact that I started my senior year of high school and just kept working at the library through college. And then, if I say the year I was graduating, you'll figure out my age, but I'm not that young, but there we go. I remember graduating and it was 9/11 was happening, and my undergrad is in dance. I got a Bachelor of Fine Arts. So I thought I was going to go and be a professional dancer. I knew I was going to go on Broadway because I can't sing, but I was ready to just go and leave the library and do that. 9/11 happened. No one was coming to shows. And I remember my supervisor at the time said, "Oh, would you like to go to library school?" And it was like a moment. It was like, okay, so I'll go, I'll get a master's, the library will pay for it. I was like, sign me up. And there we go. So that's how I became a librarian.
Yeah, I'll touch on that question really quickly. I think everybody's origin story is really unique. I was very fortunate as a child to have Black librarians in elementary, at all phases of my educational experience. And I was thinking this morning about how they didn't really fit that librarian stereotype. They were really just beautiful, very fashionable Black women. And I loved going to the library. And so it was always just a really special place. I didn't realize at the time, but all of the librarians that I had growing up went to library school at Atlanta University, which was the predecessor to Clark Atlanta University, while I ultimately ended up, I have a bachelor's in history from Spelman College, which I was not sure what to do with when I graduated, and I was looking for work, and I ran across a library job, and it required an MLS. And so I was like, well, where do you get this degree? And I discovered that right, like literally a stone's throw from Spelman's Gates is Clark Atlanta University, Trevor Arnett Hall, which is where the library school was, and I never really realized it was there. But I ended up going there, and the rest is history. But I will say that I believed that I could be a librarian, and I saw it as a viable career for me because I saw other Black women who looked like me and who were a part of my community who found joy in the work. And so I think the work that the Black Caucus does, what we've done with this book, even us being here today, is very inspirational. And I'm just really honored and privileged to be a part of that tradition. So thank you.
That's wonderful. And I see that our audience is kicking up with their Q&A. So I am going to skip over one of my questions. And if time permits, we'll go back. But I definitely want to get all the audience questions in. Okay. In chapter 12, McGowan and Simuel share advice from Black leaders in health science libraries. Let me just turn this up one more time. Okay. One piece of advice was to be prepared to deal with communication issues. So my question is, have you had to, and I quote, learn to manage the isms, such as racism, nepotism, sexism, and then it goes on, white fragility, cultural taxations. And that's from page 183. And my next part of that question is, what recommendations do you have for emerging Black librarians who wish to seek leadership opportunities in the profession? Thinking, of course, those isms would be an obstacle to growing in leadership.
I'll go ahead and take that to start off. What I'll say is that if you're looking to be in leadership in the library profession, you need to develop a thick skin. You need to have a support system and colleagues. And I consider it an honor to call these ladies colleagues, people that I can reach out to. Maybe it's to laugh or maybe it's to cry, depending on the day. But you need people that you can reach out to that will understand going through. I encourage people to seek mentors, to seek coaches, and to especially seek sponsors. And so those are three different things. And that probably is a program for another day, but go ahead and do a lookup on that so you can understand the distinction. And don't wait for someone to reach out to you. Reach out to someone that has the things that you're looking for. And you need more than one, and you need them in all those areas. And as far as communication is concerned, over communicating in multiple ways is really, really critical. That's regardless of the isms. That's just with everyone. You can say something, you can think you're just crystal clear, and they'll be like, I don't know what you're talking about, or they bring you something totally opposite to what you needed. And then you have to go back. So sometimes it's verbal, sometimes it's written, sometimes it's just audio. And you have to figure out what is going to connect to that individual person. And then over communicating, people need to hear things many, many times. They say 3, I say 5. And I'll pitch it to one of my colleagues.
I'll take the baton, Nichelle. Everything, you know, that you said, and I can't emphasize enough how important the network is. I've told people before that if not for my network, I don't think I would still be a librarian. Like my network, and particularly my experiences I've had with the Black Caucus, have been have sustained me over the past 23 years. You know, like I mentioned earlier, when I first got into the profession, it was around the time of the Gates, it was Gates scholarships back then that funded the librarian scholarships before Spectrum. And so I was expecting like these really, you know, lots of people in the color and profession, lots of people of color in the profession. And when I got in, I didn't see that. And so, or experience that. It was very lonely and very isolating. And so the Black Caucus in particular, and then, you know, my more individual network has been a wonderful resource to me, because it gets lonely sometimes, and particularly as you rise in leadership, it gets very, very lonely. And so being able to tap into that network and to find people who share your interest, who want to see you grow and want to see you do well, has been very vitally important to me. So I would encourage anyone to cultivate and sustain their professional network.
Totally. I was actually talking about leadership styles earlier today with a colleague, Alex, and it is important for you to understand what your leadership style is. And it's also really important for you to understand the leadership styles to maybe the person that you're reporting to, or to the actual if you have situations with the isms, who you know could help with that, understand how their way of working. So maybe even if you're not a leader per se, just being able to understand the different styles of leadership, and you could eventually see, like, from your bad managers, what type of leader they are, because you continue to learn from both good and bad managers. But also, again, pointing out to what both Nichelle and Chandra said, being able to hone in on your community. So these 4 individuals are definitely part of my community of people who I would go to if I had some ideas of where I would want to go professionally. But also thinking about if you're in a job where you might feel like they're not honing in on skills or building up your leadership, that is where it's really important to be part of that professional organization so that you can get those skills outside. I will say that I got much of my leadership skills from the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. So being able to, again, talk to individuals outside of your sphere of influence, and just talking to people nationally and beyond can really influence your trajectory to leadership. So I'll pass it over to Anna if she has anything she wants to say.
I'll be very concise and just say I actually pinged a few of you in inside of like the last month, and it's like, okay, I need help. And I got some practical advice from my peers here. Just manage your energy, not just your time, and then manage access to you and create some buffers depending on who the people are. It's not to be rankist. It's just, it helps you to manage your time and creating barriers around that. So one of the things that I have is, and it took a lot of work and a lot of moving around, it's just a no meeting day. I won't say what day that is. And then another one is, one of my girlfriends said, you know, you need an email pause where it unpauses itself only for 1 hour a day, and you shovel the blizzard. So I had to go to friends who are peers and near mentors and say, I am struggling, and I know what my my peers' strengths are, and they gave me excellent tips so far. I'm applying them. Let's talk to me next week. But these are the things that I would say to an aspiring leader, to just manage your energy, which is something I've struggled with, and then manage access to you. Some people can text me. Some people have to chat with me through Gmail instead. And then, there's email for everyone else. And that's not to be self-important. It's just, having being my best self for everybody, and doing my best work requires that I have those boundaries.
Well, that kind of self-care is definitely what we want to learn about as well. And from these wonderful women who have worked, sharing your stories, especially how you got all this done during the pandemic, is very rich and useful. But I do want to pivot from my questions to the Q&A, because the wonderful audience has been very active. Sorry about that. Is there a question, editors, that you see that you want to start with, or do you want me to just start at the beginning? I saw that, Chandra, you were starting to answer one question, but if not, I'll just start. I have a question from RS Blades. How do you organize each chapter and stick to the timeline to produce such an impactful book?
I'll take a stab at that one. And I just turned my camera off to make sure that any resources weren't misdirected for the audio, which I think is probably the most important point. So we used Google Drive extensively, and just the G Suite tools to sort of organize our work. As Anna mentioned, we had to ask, we were in the middle of a pandemic and people had, different situations, and we tried really hard to be considerate of people's real lives, and that they're real persons, and that, stuff comes up. I think when we did the call, we shared some things, and based on the responses and the chapters that people submitted, we were sort of able to organize them. Some themes emerged, and then I think depending on our particular interests or expertise, we sort of gathered those chapters under our umbrella, and we became the editor for a particular section. But it was, as Nell said earlier, it was definitely a labor of love. When the book wrapped and we got that PDF and it was done, it seemed like, we were never going to get there, but we got there, had a great team. And as I already mentioned, we had wonderful support from Roman and Littlefield. And it's a long-term relationship as a publisher for BCLA, going back to when they were Scarecrow Press, going back 50 years. And so we had lots of support, and we had a great team of authors. Without them, none of this would have been possible. So I hope that answers your question.
Very good.
I'll just jump in there and say there was a lot of grace extended by my fellow editors. And so we were kind with each other. We worked together in addition to working in the Google Docs and the Google Suite. And I think that helped us as well.
I'm just going to say it again. I was the pregnant one, so the grace was heavily extended to me. So I'll just put it out there.
The Q&A module has questions and comments. So I'm going to leave the comments for you all to read at another time, but move on to the next question. First initial D, last name Rogers. What is your advice for someone looking for a career change within libraries, moving from a public library to different library fields without some of the preferred experience?
Go ahead, Anna.
So actually, we had someone inquire, they wanted to come back and get a certification. That's one route. You can maybe pursue continuing education, get a certification, advance, and stretch your skill sets that way. There's lots of professional development. Another way is there's growing residency programs, or even just internships, virtual internships to boot. So you can find opportunities, especially now with so many things and so many, like you can be a librarian completely hybrid or virtual. So I would say connect, network. We also have a mentorship program called Level Up through BCALA. And there's several other organizations, several NALCOs that also have mentorship programs. For BCALA is available, even our listserv, I think it was last week, an MLIS student posted to the listserv and said, hey, how do I negotiate this offer? And people just, the thread was popping. So reach out, and I would say as an organization, we're pretty close knit. And so you can post to the listserv, you can ask the professional development committee. You can also, as you join, there's a portal called Your Membership, and you can access a mentor. If nothing else, we probably conference and webinar a little too much in this field, but there's always opportunities to learn and gain professional development skills that way. I hope that helps. If that didn't, we also have our email addresses, I think behind Shantae and Nichelle's, and please do reach out if that wasn't helpful. Nichelle?
I concur with everything you say. I would go back to sponsors, mentors, and coaches. Ask people for that experience that you're looking for. If there's someone in a different field and you think you can help them with a project, think you can shadow them, don't be shy, reach out. A lot of people will be flattered. Reach out to people and have an informational coffee, be it virtual or in person. Just say, can I possibly have 15 minutes of your time to learn about how you got to that path? And do you think there is something that I can do to move into wherever I'm trying to move in? I always like to say the closed mouth does not get fed. And so you have to tell people what you want, and you have to say it more than once as well.
Question from T, first initial T, Hodge. First, thank you so much for your leadership, energy, and continued work. From the proposal to editing and submission process, how did you center self-care? I see you all smiling.
We heart Tawana, that's why we know T Hodge, Tawana Hodge, woo, yay. Much of your work, Tawana, and your colleagues really, I'll say NCAL was a huge component of telling us to center ourselves and make sure that we put ourselves first. Like Nichelle always says, no is a complete sentence, it's a full book. And just being able to just think like, if you are burnt out, you're no good, not just at work, but at home and everywhere else. So you really do need to take that time, and whether it is going to get your hair done or your nails done, whatever feels good to you, you just need to take that time. You can't say, oh, I don't have an hour. The hour will do you justice. And God forbid you take a nap here and there. That people do that as well. So just being able to really think about that. And I'll say just during that time of the book, I'll think about it. I was kind of like a robot, and I don't know how many people could think about that. It was kind of like I was just going, not thinking about the time to have rest, because time didn't really make sense to me at that time during the pandemic.
And you were doing so much in that time.
So it wasn't until hearing, these beautiful people on the call, as well as Tawana and many other colleagues, just like, you have to think about you. And it really does resonate to me. And so let me tell you, I will be the first one to say, nope, 5 o'clock, I'm not checking email anymore. Just really, like Anna was saying, putting up those barriers, because you will burn yourself out and be no good for anyone.
I'll jump in real quick. I think it's important for us to support our colleagues and coworkers. And if you see that they're doing too much, if they look tired, if they look like they're not quite with it, pull them aside and say, hey, can I support you? Can I help you with something? Is there something you can take off your plate? We've got to support each other and set each other up for success. And I have my name at the top of my to-do list because I can't draw from an empty pitcher. And so you can only give so much. And you really do have to sharpen the saw and be balanced. And Shantae is right. After 5, I'm not checking email. Weekends, not checking email. Vacation, not checking email. That means it's not a vacation. Because once you start that, people expect you to continue it.
I just can't wait for your book of sayings. This is very helpful, but there are a lot of questions. So anonymous attendee asks, some persons may find it intimidating to interact with fellow Black librarians because of the status that they might hold. What do you say to those fellow Blacks who feel that way?
We
I'll
put
take
our
a
pants
stab.
on one leg at a time, like everybody else. Go for it,
Yeah,
Chandra.
I'll take a stab at that one. I have to say that one of the BCLA has done a lot for me, but one of the things that it has done is it has given me access to leaders within the profession. These people are so approachable. I got a call this morning from Wanda Brown, the past president of ALA. I know Julius Jefferson personally. So these people are very, very approachable. They're very down to earth. And you know, again, being in BCLA has just given me access to work with them up close and to get them to know them as people. And they are extremely inspiring to me personally. So I would just say, you know, join BCLA, participate in the programming, get involved when there are calls for committees and activities. That's one of the ways I really got to know people, like being on the National Conference of African American Librarians Committee. I got to work very closely with the vice president and president. And so you can build relationships through service. And I would encourage you, when service opportunities, which I'm sure Nichelle has plenty of them, come about, volunteer, because BCLA will find some work for you to do and you can get to know a lot of people that way.
We're going to have to move to a lightning round, and I'm going to ask 3 questions, and maybe you all can take one of each. Oh, each of you can take one. Can you speak on how to deal with structural racism in your workplace? That's 1. 2, what advice do you have for student leaders that are trying to spread awareness of DEI matters in library school? And the 3rd, let me scroll down here. Oh, can someone speak? So can someone ask the panel what they think about how Black librarians can be more impactful in racial equity spaces? Structural racism, being more impactful.
I can take the last one because I have some
Okay.
concrete ideas on that one. Should I
Okay.
jump in or should I wait? Do you want to go in order, Joni?
No,
Okay,
we got 2 minutes, 3
Yes.
minutes.
I'll be extremely concise. So as far as impact, there's a lot of opportunity, again, for us to write more op-eds. To also, we have data. We're also creating a curriculum, a side curriculum, right? So not an official LIS curriculum on the history of Black librarianship. Why was there a need for BCALA? Because the southern states were still segregating, and ALA could not get Alabama and Mississippi to accept Black members. Why is there only one HBCU? Because of ALA accreditation and it being draconian and racist, and on and on and on. So we see this pattern, to speak to the question on systemic racism. So creating a bias for us curriculum, creating a bias for us nationalized student organization, independent of LIS schools, and also contributing more to scholarship, getting it in posterity, publishing and using. We have data. We also have a Black librarian timeline. We created a framework, or adapted the Black consciousness framework to LIS. So the stuff is there. Just go to the website. The tools are there. We have toolkits. It's just a matter of disseminating it. So you're right about that point. It needs to get out more in the ether, in the universe. We need to share these things.
I'll go ahead and jump on structural racism very quickly, high level. I would say that one, do you have a union in your institution? If you have a union, that is a good tool to use. Another resource is GARE, the Government for Racial Equity. I forgot what the A is. GARE, G-A-R-E. And then I would say that you got to start speaking truth to power, and that there are strength in numbers. We need to have lobbyists. We're working on a toolkit right now to address structural racism in libraries across our country. And we're going to have to start using legal means to push people so they can understand. The time for being polite and kind in the face of this kind of adversity, I think, is over. And we have to stand up straight, stand up tall, and be willing to do the difficult work. And I will call our allies to assist us. And actually, when you see something, say something, do something.
We're going to have to end it on those powerful words. Thank you so much, Nichelle. We'll definitely have to do another one of these. And I'm going to turn it back over to Dean Lim.
Thank you so much, Dr. Floyd.
Thank you all.
Thank you all so very much. I was amazed by the presentation, the engagement. You could see how your words and ideas mattered so much to people. The questions themselves, we could have stayed here for another hour or two. And I agree with Joni, maybe we need to do this again and allow even more space for discussion, questions and answers. So thank you very much. I also want to thank Judy Kidd, who's been helping us. She's a manager in the Dean's office at the UMD Libraries, for helping with the registrations and the logistics, and to Kate Maloney and the library's strategic communications team for doing a great job with promotion. We are going to be sharing, hopefully in the chat, some links to other resources for you. And we don't have very much time left there, or the slide. Yes, you can see on the slide that we have some resources for you. We'll be posting the recording of this session, as I mentioned, on our YouTube page from the UMD Libraries. And I wish we had more time to spend together, but thank you again. And I hope you have a wonderful evening ahead of you.